If you need any help, right.
Getting the speakers to stand. All right.
Seems like you're very much on the same.
Hi everyone, we're going to get started in just a second. I just wanted to let you know, if you haven't figured it out already, to get on Wi-Fi, you can select guest Wi-Fi, and then you need to say that you want to request a guest account and just follow the instructions. It's usually pretty straightforward, and it shouldn't take you long. If you're still having problems, just let me know and I can come and help you. But you should be able to simply say who you are, that you're with a conference at Boston University, and that's enough. It'll send you an alert when they've approved you, and you can log on. Our hashtag is journalism and truth, all one word. Feel free to live tweet. This is an emerging media conference, so we will not judge you for being on your phone the entire time. And we would like to introduce you to Dr. James Katz, who will get us started. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. Thank you, Liz Crocker, Allison Keir, very much for your assistance this morning and throughout the conference. So I'd like to begin by adding my own welcome and tell you how happy I am to be here. And I'll be making a few framing remarks in just a moment. But before I begin, I'd like to invite my dean, Dean Tom Fiedler, who has been a journalist, an editor, and now a professor of journalism at the College of Communication here at Boston University, based on his many years of experience, including uncovering some widely reported misbehavior of top presidential candidates. He's also been a great leader in terms of looking for ways that journalism can live up to its high aspirations, and has been a constant guide and goad in that regard. So, Dean Fiedler, please join me up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. I had the pleasure of meeting a number of you yesterday evening, so I will be brief, but I just did want to add my welcome and appreciation for what you're doing. And I'm so impressed with the quality of the panels that are going to go forward. And I want to applaud Dr. Katz for doing that. The title of the conference, Journalism and the Search for Truth in an Age of Social Media, I think really does encompass just about all of it. But I suppose I wanted to make the point that underlying the whole issue of fake news and our concern about fake news and alternate facts and so forth is really the fundamental principle of our democracy. As Dr. Katz mentioned, I spent many years as a journalist, newspaper, primarily reporter, editor, and I had the good fortune of working for an organization that was headed by a man named John S. Knight. You may know the Knight Foundation. John S. Knight was the founding editor, he and his brother, and what became the Knight newspapers. And he had a very simple motto about what journalists ought to do. It was find the truth and print it. That was it. He said, just if you do that, you're doing what journalism is all about. What he didn't have benefit of was the tag on this conference in an age of social media, where we know finding the truth is much more difficult and dispersing the truth. And yet, again, nothing is more important, as all of us know. The bedrock of any democracy is that it's based on it's the will of the people. And as Madison made very clear in Hamilton in the Federalist Papers that it's dependent on an informed electorate. So if our electorate does not have information on which to make those decisions, democracy is in trouble. And of course, the quality of that information is fundamental. That's why the importance of a conference like this and other conferences that are now going on in so many places is to remind people that accurate information, verifiable information that's truly based on truth and facts is critically important, and all other information is misinformation, it's propaganda. And as journalists, that's insidious. That's what we have to fight about. So again, I applaud all of you for coming. I thank all of you for coming and participating in this. I look forward to listening in as much as I can. I'm delighted that this is going to be live streamed, so I have a chance to do it. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jim, and go from there. Again, thanks very much.
Thank you very much for those remarks, Tom. I'm now going to take a look here and see if... Okay. Well, we're partway there. I'm reminded of that commercial where somebody's in a huge hall trying to get his presentation to work, and they're saying Alt F5, Control H, and so forth. And then somebody in a plaintive voice shouts out, "Get a Mac." So thank you. Let me offer my welcome to that of the Dean and emphasize, of course, this is an international conference. It's being live streamed to countries around the world, as well as here in this country. But I think it's important in a sense that this is being held in the United States of America. From the very beginnings of this country, freedom of the press was a bedrock principle. You find that in the letters and writings of Thomas Jefferson. You also find it in the writings of Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was not only an advocate of free press, as was Jefferson, but he also saw that, in a sense, the press was the court that adjudicated issues and, in a sense, passed judgment and then held the parties responsible. This was, I think, a very sophisticated understanding of the press's role, one that we, of course, have here today. So let me then sketch out some of the fundamental principles that we're going to be inquiring into here at today's and tomorrow's two meetings. And of course, that is to take a multidisciplinary, multinational examination of journalism's search for truth. And we want to try to understand what journalism's multi-level function is, to understand the process of producing news that's accurate, as well as the processes that are involved with producing fake news, biased news, distorted news, and how we can navigate those very rocky waters to get to the truth. We also want to look at the human dimension and the structural, sociological dimensions of the processes, so that we not just look at journalism in isolation, but within the context of a human process. So I want to thank our co-sponsors, which include, first and foremost, Andrew Lack, our trustee here at Boston University, the Feld Family Professorship, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and its support of the joint Department of Philosophy and Division of Emerging Media Studies initiative on computational technologies and the human values, the Rafiq B. Hariri Institute for Computing and Computational Science and Engineering, and the Consulate General of France in Boston. So without those people, we wouldn't be here today. So once again, I want to emphasize, as I've done in the framing literature, that this is not to be a partisan or ideological attack or defense of certain people or positions or parties. Rather, it's aimed to be a scholarly inquiry into these processes and to use our critical tools, our scholarly tools, our intellectual tools, to examine what is going on and to look for ways to find solutions to lead us to a better outcome. And of course, we have multiple disciplines represented here and will be deployed in this examination, listed there. Just to echo Tom's remarks about the importance of the truth and its pursuit, we can think of the trinity, the three holy aspects of journalism, which is objectivity, seriousness, and truthfulness. These are the touchstone for what journalists have traditionally aspired to achieve. But of course, not everyone agrees that these should be the touchstone. Some believe it should be advocacy journalism and other types of journalism. And so this standard is under attack. And I think one of the important questions we wish to address is what is the role of social media in this attack, and whether indeed there will be profound changes that we need to address in our understanding of journalism's role. So here's some data suggesting why we're in a crisis mode with journalism, which is overall trust, as you can see, for Democrats has declined but is still relatively stable. For independents, and especially for Republicans, it has declined sharply. This, of course, has important ramifications for questions of comity and trying to reach agreeable conclusions in society. If some people just don't believe, based on ideology, in a source of information, that poses operational problems for democracies, if not other problems as well. Of course, fake news is not something new. It's been around since before newspapers existed. And however, we don't know when the first fake newspaper news was published, but we do have pretty good evidence that this was the first fake news photograph from 1840. It was really before or coincident with the daguerreotype, and it was by Hippolyte Bayard, who faked his own death, made a picture of his drowned corpse, supposedly, and circulated it to his friends as a political statement about his denial of credit for the invention of photography. So I think the ironies of this photo are rich from 1840. So a long history of photographs. And of course, even today, or recently, we have examples of fake news. Now, some of you probably doubt that Hillary Clinton ever adopted an alien baby, but the proof that I can show you is that it's certified as an official photo. It's not, it is demonstrated there. Yeah, those of you who say, we need vouching for the information we receive, well, there it is, official. Of course, I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek, so please don't misinterpret my remarks if you're not a native English speaker or if you lack a sense of humor.
It's too late, Jim. It's already online.
Yeah, they'll just clip that last part. But of course, today, certainly we feel that we have a crisis of fake news, despite the fact that it's been around for quite a while. And of course, what's at stake? The results of elections, as we're seeing recently in Europe, even yesterday perhaps, questions of public policy and civil order. Here I hope you can see is a brief history of fake news over the last 6 months, and I'm indebted to my colleague Jacob Groshek for the provision of the Twitter data, and here's Google term for fake news. As you can see, during the election, or as I hope you can see, during the election there was only very little interest in the topic of fake news. But once the election happened, you see a spike prior to the Electoral College, and then President Trump attacked the news media at his first press conference, and there was an even larger spike. So I think this shows a growing level, but when did it grow? Only immediately after the election, in the 2016 U.S. presidential elections aftermath. But nonetheless, there is, I dare say, universal agreement that fake news poses a threat. So we have Secretary Clinton saying that it's not about politics or partisanship. Lives are at risk. It's a danger that must be addressed quickly. We have former President Obama lamenting the spread of fake news. We have Republican former House Speaker Newt Gingrich decrying spread of fake news. We have Donald Trump decrying the spread of fake news. And of course, it's not limited to the United States. Germany is worried about it. France is worried about fake news. The CEO of Apple is worried about fake news, says it's killing people's minds. Australia, worried about fake news. Britain, fake news worries. Even Venezuela is worried about fake news because it says that CNN is distorting the truth, that these rumors of hunger and misery are fake news. So therefore, CNN is kicked out. President Assad has dismissed allegations of abuse, the hanging of thousands of prisoners in his jail, as fake news. Even Vladimir Putin has decried fake news, although he's also been accused of deploying fake news. So against this backdrop, then, I see that we can hold that there are definitely important issues, and we have an array of panels today and tomorrow, and we're about to hear about the journalistic crisis, the fourth estate, social media, and communicating the truth, followed by 3 other panels, as you can see in your programs. And then tomorrow we have 3 more panels, and we have a keynote speaker, Michael Schudson, giving an address. And in addition, today during the lunch hour, we have a poster session. So while you're enjoying your lunch, I hope you will take advantage of the posters to stimulate your minds further and have greater engagement. I would like to say also that the panels and the papers are an important part of this event, but so too are the breaks, the receptions, the lunches, and so forth, because this is an opportunity for you to circulate, to meet new people, to build new connections, and to share and compare ideas, and also to raise questions with the panelists that you've heard. So even though we will have discussions at the end of each panel, it really makes sense to follow those things in depth during these interval periods that are an intentional and important part of our event. So with that, let the symposium begin. Oh, there's the hashtag, by the way.
Well, thank you, Jim. Good morning, colleagues, friends, visitors. Welcome to Boston University. My name is Chris Daly. I am a professor here at Boston University, and I want to make sure that everyone feels welcome here in this beautiful space to consider some difficult issues. And as Professor Katz said, some of the truths and problems that really confront us in a new way in the times we're living in. My background is in the history of journalism, so this question about what's new and what's enduring is always toward the front of my mind. And I thought I'd like to take a moment here at the beginning to introduce some themes that I hope will persist throughout today's panel and also maybe the rest of the whole conference. American journalism, and I think journalism in much of the world, is under attack today as never before in our country's history. The business model that sustained journalism since the early 19th century is now sputtering. We journalists, have been subject to a deliberate campaign to discredit the news media and undermine the very meaning of the word fact. Recently, journalists have been the targets of a tweet storm of scorn from a president of the United States who routinely uses the epithet, the dishonest media. He has denounced individual reporters and news organizations by name. At his pre-election rallies, crowds turned against the penned-in reporters, shouting out threats and insults. The president's staff even threatened to evict the news media from the White House. One of the many threats that didn't really actually last very long. They realized very quickly it would be a lonely place without journalists making them famous. But to make matters worse, some people seeking quick profits or political power want to foul the news stream by polluting it deliberately with fake news. And all the while, more and more is demanded of journalists. Instant news feeds, multimedia productions, 24/7 updates, clever posts on social media, even as the workforce, the paid professional staff of journalists, continues to shrink. In some parts of the world, independent journalists are arrested, jailed, sometimes beaten and killed. Now, against that bleak backdrop, I should also say, journalism over the centuries has been called many things, but never unimportant. Across the centuries, kings and presidents, generals and admirals, business executives, bishops, coaches, cops, hucksters of all kinds, have all felt the heft of a free and independent press leaning against them, pushing back against their schemes and plots. The powerful know that they are under scrutiny from reporters who are trying to keep them honest. As agents for the public, the news media have that ultimate responsibility, as has been said here, to seek the truth and tell it, and let the consequences be damned. Let me also mention, journalism has also been called a discipline of verification. As a profession, we take an empirical approach to the world. We work late, trying to verify facts. We check and double check. We measure and count. We look things up. Without these efforts, the quality of our collective information would quickly degrade into rumor, mere supposition, and pure prejudice. Now, I don't want to frame this in an entirely negative way, because I'm also happy to report that I see signs of resilience in our field. We may be battered, we may feel lonely and discouraged at times, but we are far from defeated. Subscriptions are rising, money is coming back to our business, and great work is being done. So I invite everyone here today to join our panel in putting our heads together to think hard about how we can keep the lights on, not just in the newsrooms of the world, but also in the minds of all the people of the world. With that, let me introduce our panel. And we are a bit shorthanded this morning because one of our panelists, David Karpf of George Washington University, is unfortunately unable to be with us today. That will allow our remaining panelists to expand a bit on their remarks, and it will leave plenty of time for questions from the room. I'm a firm believer in the view that very often the smartest person in the room is the room. So I expect that our collective intelligence will really help to elevate the whole discussion. We're going to hear first today from Dominique Cardon, who is an associate professor of sociology at Sciences Po in Paris, the institution that studies political science. He is working on the transformation of public space and the uses of new technology. He has a special interest in machine learning techniques and in the application of algorithms. He has also published widely in French and English, on the internet, and on paper as well. So we'll be joined later by Craig Robertson, who is a doctoral student and research assistant in the Quello Center at Michigan State University. He is a native of New Zealand and has worked as a journalist in various media roles in New Zealand, but now his research interests bring him to the intersection of politics, journalism, and digital media. So please welcome Dominique Cardon, our first speaker.
Perhaps I need some help. It's there.
After the obligatory tech consult, I think we'll be able to get rolling. Okay.
I'm used to.
Wonderful.
Good morning to everybody. I first want to thank very deeply the organizer for the invitation, and I'm very pleased to participate to this discussion. But I'm not sure that I'm the best first speaker for this conference, because I will give you with a very French accent, a very French presentation of the situation, and perhaps with a kind of different view on the issue about fake news, on filter bubbles, and things like that. But I think it could bring a kind of provocative discussion for us. So I will begin by saying that before the French presidential election, we were told that the electoral campaign will be polluted by fake news because of Brexit, because of Trump, because of Austria, because of Netherlands. And the idea create a kind of public panic about the question of the shift in the the French public space during the election. We were also told that people will be trapped in filter bubbles, and the famous filter bubbles become a major public subject in French newspapers. We were told that the power of the media will be dismantled by digital social networks, and we were told since many, many months that the leader of the Conservative Party, which were first Alain Juppé and François Fillon, will win the election against Marine Le Pen. It was written. Everybody thinks that it will happen during the election. Ultimately, the amount of fake news in French public space were important, for sure, but it was rather low. It doesn't have such a strong effect if we have a very broader view on the question. The diversity of the political offer has been relatively shown to citizens, and we have TV and newspaper present the different aspects of the political project of the different candidates during the campaign. We should underline the fact that TV debates have played a crucial role in electoral decision, more than social media. And in many aspects, the places of TV programs, of newspaper, still remain very important in political decision in the campaign. And by the way, the conservative candidate lost, François Fillon, has been defeated yesterday. So we could say that nothing has really changed, except that everything is different. And the kind of things that I want to share with you is the idea that we are thinking that everything is new, everything is different, social media is disturbing the public space in a kind of bizarre way, transforming everything. My opinion and my idea is that we need to have a closer consideration on a more sociological, perhaps, because I'm a sociologist, but a more sociological view on this question. And sometimes we have some very simple reaction against the idea that there is a social media transformation, that everything could be new, that people are trapped inside fake news. But we don't have a lot of empirical evidence of the impact or effect of filter bubbles on citizen electoral decision, in fact. And we missed some survey on this kind of question. We have also, perhaps, in this kind of strange debate, a tendency to overestimate techno-determinist effect of the new digital tools that we use, and we always say that it's because of the algorithm, it's because of Facebook, it's because of, and this kind of techno-deterministic interpretation is, I'm sure about that. There's something wrong in this kind of immediate, simplistic interpretation of the transformation of public space. And perhaps the question is that we have a lack of familiarity, because this is very new for us. We are entering in a new world, in a new architecture of the public space. And we are not very familiar with the specificity of the circulation of digital information today. And we need to develop new survey on those kind of questions. So my idea is just to give you a few insights on the things that we can learn from digital methods that have been developed by sociologists and computer scientists since a few years, and just to enter into different kind of questions. But there are three results that seems important to me coming from digital study. The first is about filter bubble. The question of filter bubble is always coming into the debate, and I just want to underline three different results. One is coming from the study from Bakshi, Missing an Epidemic, about the Facebook filter bubble. And the thing that is, and it's a robust study, it's something very well documented and with a lot of data to prove it. The thing that appears is that it's not the algorithm that choose information for Facebook users, it's users themselves. When they choose their friends on Facebook, they are choosing because of many different sociological factors that we know since many times, because of homophilia, of sex, of age, of social occupation, of cultural taste. People are looking for people that have likeness with them. And because of that, they are creating this kind of filter bubble. But the contribution of the algorithm power on the choice of people is very low, even if we choose the accountability of the algorithm and the accountability of Facebook practices are very important in our society. Let's say that perhaps the algorithm is not the main question. Perhaps the question is the question of education of the public. It's a question of the way we choose our friends. And we should underline also the fact that these results confirm the traditional interpretation of selective exposure to information. We don't learn a lot of this kind of question. We know this from many times. People who have the habit of reading a conservative newspaper don't read a liberal newspaper. That's not something common in our society since many years. And we know that in sociology of media since many times. There are more complex arguments, but one of them has been shown by Barbara and other computer scientists, and they've done something very interesting, showing the multidimensionality of the exposition to information by Twitter users. And they showed that for the same sample of Twitter account, that there is a filter bubble as soon as we are speaking about political question, and we have those two different clusters of accounts that are retweeting themselves in a kind of bubble. But as soon as the same Twitter accounts are discussing about other subjects, like the Newton shooting, Boston Marathon, Super Bowl, or things like that, the bubble disappears. So people are exposed to different information. But when they want to share information, they are sharing information for which they have a kind of agreement on. The filter bubble is something that people choose to express by the sharing that they're doing on internet. And another study shows that, a very interesting study by Solomon Messing and Sin Westwood, shown that they've done a kind of experimental, psycho-experimental settings in proposing to people 3 different representations of information. The first is with these media sources. The second is without the media sources, but with social media analytics. And the third one is with media affiliation and social media analytics. And the thing that appears is that if we don't have the sources of media, people are sharing more information that are not close to their own opinion. So the idea is that we share information because of the source affiliation, and it creates a kind of bubble. Is linked to the fact that we attribute to different media some kind of political or ideological or a kind of value representation of what kind of information they are publishing. The second result is about the articulation between social media and traditional media, and that's the thing that is important in the French case, but I think it's also important in the American one, as it has been shown by the Pew Internet. When we look at people using Twitter in order to share information, it's a very small sample of the population. It's 9% for Americans, and it's only 6% for French people. And it's a very small part of the population that are concerned by using social media in order to share information on Twitter. It's different on Facebook, but on Facebook we don't have the data, and it's a kind of problem in this kind of situation. But we should say, thank you very much, that television programs remain central to the dissemination of information, particularly for political debates, and it has been shown in very different situations in the French case. But what appears is that when there is a viral, large, huge, massive viral diffusion of information, and sometimes that fake, false, distorted information on social media, it's because of professional media relaying the information. There is no this kind of spontaneous, horizontal virality of the information. The virality of the information is always coming because traditional media republish, discuss, comment, debunk the information that appears on those kind of questions. And we also see that on this French graph about the uses of Twitter speaking about politics during the French election campaign, that as soon as there is a TV debate, there is a large amount of social media. So the idea is that there is 2 different worlds. The world of traditional media and the world of social media is clearly false. We have one world in which social media and traditional media are deeply articulated. In the embeddedness of the different media are the important question to consider. And the third idea is that there is a hierarchy of digital visibility in this new world. And I think that it's something that we miss sometimes. And we always think about social media as a kind of plan organization with two-dimensional representation. In fact, there is three-dimensional representation. There is a huge and largely unequal and uneven distribution of the visibility. People at the top of the digital sphere have a large impact on other users, but most of the time, and most of the time means that very often when people are tweeting and they have 200 followers, nobody sees what they tweet. And we always forget this fact. And sometimes people at the top of the hierarchy of visibility are retweeting information or fake news that are coming from the bottom line of visibility on the digital space. And it gives a large amount of importance to information that shouldn't have in a traditional representation of what is visibility and what is importance in the public space. So let me show you different initiatives that have been launched during the French election. The first one is a politoscope. It's a kind of representation of Twitter accounts of political candidates, and the activists, the supporters on other different Twitters that are linked to different political candidates during the French campaign. And the graph that we could see is a very interesting one, is that we have the traditional left-right representation of the French traditional public political position, with Hamon, Valls with the Socialist Party, and the Republican, which is the Conservative Party with Fillon, and in the center, left, right, center, Macron, which is here. And we have those two new different actors in the political sphere, new anti-systemic position, which is Marine Le Pen, the far-right candidate, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon, which is the far-left candidate in this situation. And the thing that we tried to do with David Chavalarias and the Politoscope team that produced this kind of representation is to try to show what part of the Twittosphere, and Twittosphere is not representative of the French citizen, and to see when a fake news, when an insult, when a kind of political argument which is controversial impact the different position in the Twitter sphere. And we see during the primary election of the Conservative Party, part of the far right says that Alain Juppé, and they call him Ali Juppé, with the idea that he is a Muslim, with an Arabic term. And we clearly see that part of the tweet that shares the idea that Alain Juppé is Ali Juppé was on the far right, but also on the traditional conservative part of the representation. So we have those kind of situation where insult coming from the bottom of the internet are sometimes there is a kind of relay coming from the top and coming from people who are linked to Nicolas Sarkozy and François Fillon, who are well-known political figures, not major but well-known political figures that try to use arguments coming from the far right and try to give them importance in the political debates. And we have the same situation, but I won't comment, about the Champs-Élysées attack, which appeared 1 week ago, just before the election. But what can we do with this kind of thing? It's very interesting. It brings a lot of insight for sociologists in order to understand what is happening in the Twittosphere. But can we predict something of this kind of information? The answer is no. No, never. And there are, during the French campaign, a lot of big data consultant company promise to poll survey, traditional poll surveys, that they will have a better prediction of the result of the election. They all failed in their prediction. For them, Marine Le Pen and Jean-Luc Mélenchon should have been the two candidates. We know that it's not the case. we should say that polls, traditional poll survey, give since many months, give us quite a good prediction of what appears yesterday night. So my idea is that in order to understand fake news, it's important to have this debate on journalism, the deontology of journalism, the role of journalism, the places of truth in our society. But perhaps one way of thinking about that is to see not to have a consideration not on the content of the news, but of the form of circulation of the news. And perhaps the thing that we need to learn is how the circuit, the kind of circulation, the interaction between high visibility and low visibility, the way news are circulating in public sphere is the most important thing that we need to know in order to have a better literacy about digital understanding. One example is one fake news that we tried to analyze in the distribution of the information. And the fake news is that Emmanuel Macron is gay. And it has been launched, it was a vague and imprecise information given by two different French magazines months in February. And nobody tried to take this information again and give them importance on publicity. But suddenly, it comes sometimes, suddenly Russia Today gave importance to the news and launched the idea that Emmanuel Macron is gay. And the thing that we've seen is that in red you have the information Emmanuel Macron is gay, and in green we have the debunking of the information. No, Russia Today is saying that Emmanuel Macron is gay. And that's something that appears in all the kind of fake news that we have analyzed. At the beginning, there are some part of the French web that says that Emmanuel Macron is gay, and it appears, it changes, it appears, it disappears, it appears, it disappears, with a very low visibility in the digital sphere. And suddenly, there is a huge and massive, it will appear now, a massive debunking of the information. But the fact is that information, when information is published largely by many, many different publishers, it's only for the debunking. So we have this strange situation where we have a fake news at the bottom of the web, and suddenly we have a huge amount of discussion about Emmanuel Macron is gay, but it's debunking information that is coming very frequently, and we could say that for different fake news that we've analyzed. The most important part have been published by the debunk of the reliable media in this kind of situation. So I will go further on my last point, is the fact that we could say that fake news coming from below are not going up, but and it's the situation for Trump also. What happens when the top is giving fake news in this situation? And we have in France this kind of situation with François Fillon. There is a scandal about him. The information is true. There is many verification about the fact that he employed his wife and she didn't do a lot of things when she was employed as parliamentary assistant in this situation. And the thing is that people really believe that François Fillon employed his wife, and people were quite sure that she didn't do a lot during his work. But what happened is a kind of mercury culture on internet and Twitter that gives a lot of importance to François Fillon, who was at the most important tweet on the Twittersphere, on the French Twittersphere, we are speaking about François Fillon, but with an ironic, humoristic style that was always present in the François Fillon reputation on the web. So I just want to conclude in saying that we need a more complex view on digital influence. Sometimes in this debate about filter bubble and fake news, we are coming to, it's a kind of return to the theory of the strong effect. Perhaps something like a Adorno-Horkheimer discussion about fascist regime and manipulation, and people are easy to manipulate. With just one false information, they will change their vote, as if something like that could happen in our society. So we need empirical survey and the reception of digital information. And to conclude, I will say that the paradox of the individualization of society is that social media respond to new social and cultural demands. It's because people are asking for organizing, accessing themselves to information, and not by the mediation of media organization and journalists, that social media have this fantastic success today. But we are in a kind of situation in which there are two different representations that are fighting together. The first is the idea that social media foster curiosity and information diversity for those with a lot of cultural capital, and then close in more homogeneous social networks those who have little cultural capital. And we have those kind of representation which can bring us to the kind of conclusion that we need to protect people against themselves, because some of them have not enough resources or capital cultural in order to understand, and they could be naive, they could be manipulated by fake news. And perhaps we need to have a more complex and more sophisticated reflection on how to reinstall the editorial function on the media. Thank you very much.
What we'd like to do is have both talks delivered, and then we will take questions here when we're seated, and we'll have a multi-directional discussion. So next, let me welcome our second speaker, Craig Robertson. And I don't know if you need the obligatory tech consult, but let's hope that your slides are queued up.
I assume they're all on the main desktop. Aha. Walking around? No. I should be all right. Slideshow from the beginning. I kind of love that he went first because I agree with basically everything he said. I also feel like I'm the youngest person in this room by a long shot, but that's normal for me. I'm always the youngest person in any room. Yeah, it's strange that we're on this panel called The Fourth Estate, Social Media and Communicating the Truth, because we're both talking about filter bubbles, really. So mine is on filter bubbles and Google. The genesis of this sort of experimental study was obviously Perez's filter bubble hypothesis. I call it a hypothesis because it's not entirely empirically proven. It's kind of anecdotal. The entire book is quite anecdotal. So I still call it a hypothesis. And a lot of talk about filter bubbles comes in terms of Facebook. So I asked the question, and actually Google posed the question to ask, what about filter bubbles and Google? So that's the sort of genesis of what I will be talking about. The background to this sort of experimental study is it's part of a small part of a larger study into the role of Google search and the role of search in political opinion formation, which used to be the title, but it keeps getting changed. And it's a survey of people in Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain. So the survey data you were asking for exists. We just haven't reported it yet. There's actually a lot of stuff in that report I would love to talk about right now, but we haven't released it yet because we haven't had the go-ahead, but there's a lot of interesting stuff. Basically, the gist of the report is, don't worry, everyone, we'll be okay. And so the idea for this experimental study sort of came from Google themselves when they asked, is there a filter bubble problem with Google's search results? So we thought of exploring that. This is based on several other Google experimental studies which have explored how Google's search algorithm works, because as much as I ask Google, how does your search algorithm work, they won't tell me, so we have to figure it out ourselves. And a lot of the gist of those studies is that most of Google search results are, in terms of personalization, are based on location, browser history, cookies. and that any other sort of factors don't rise above the level of noise in terms of personalization. So if we filter out location and we control just the browser history, we can sort of explore the idea of a filter bubble hypothesis in Google search results. So this was an experiment conducted at Michigan State, control for location, plug in some extremely partisan search terms and see if we can create a filter bubble. So that's sort of the design of this study. It's a sort of exploratory proof of concepts to see if you can actually create a filter bubble. I think BuzzFeed might have done a similar thing. BuzzFeed always seems to be doing these semi-academic studies, which are quite interesting. But that's sort of the idea. Can we create a filter bubble by using partisan search terms? And I thought I'd take a different approach to a lot of the approaches that get taken. I'm sort of the same field of social science. I'm not a computer scientist. And I wanted to take an approach to sort of mirrored reality in terms of if this was a real person searching, could you create a filter bubble instead of you can plug 10,000 search terms through a computer and do it really artificially and create a filter bubble and say, oh, this is a massive problem. But how do people actually use search? What's natural, what's realistic? And when you do that in a sort of social science approach, can you create a filter bubble? And then is there a problem if you do create one? So this sort of general experimental approach, I designed this entire experiment myself. Just came out of this head. I pulled a corpus of search phrases from RNC and DNC party platforms because I wanted to do this in kind of a methodological way. I selected right accounts, left accounts for computers to enter search phrases into. I searched them all manually because apparently when I do research, I do everything manually. I'm a content analysis kind of person by trade, and I always end up doing it by hand. But I like that sort of manual approach because it sort of tries to mirror reality. There's some other technical details about using search queries and autocomplete. So it's exploration of, can I create a filter bubble in Google search results, in Google's autocomplete results, and then so what sources do you get after this process of training? So it's about entering partisan search phrases into Google on different accounts. So you assign left-leaning accounts, assign right-leaning accounts, assign a mixed account sort of as a control, and see what you get. So the results are based on pre-training and post-training search results. Do a pre-training baseline to see what Google brings up when you search certain things. So if you search privacy, if you search terrorism, if you search immigration, what shows up as a pre-test baseline. Plug in a whole bunch of partisan search terms over a long period of time, build up a search history, click on search results, and then do a post-test to see if the results sort of change and what happens to the search results in terms of are they more right-leaning, are they more left-leaning, etc. Search results and partisanship. So these are the basic findings which sort of mirror most past research. 16% of post-trading search results are unique. But the interesting parts are the personalization is consistent across users. So browser type doesn't really matter. Being logged into Google or not logged into Google using an incognito browser or a regular browser doesn't really matter in terms of overall personalization. It's consistent across accounts. There's some volatility in terms of different search terms, so which is quite obvious. That's found in past research as well. Immigration, you get a lot of more personalization. You get more things from trade. But of most relevance here is that there are no partisan differences observed, at least in my study, between left and right accounts. So people searching for very left-wing things, very right-wing things, all end up with basically the same search results after all the training. I also looked at topical personalization, so whether your results become more political at the end. And in terms of search results, it's sort of consistent with other research again. There's no topical personalization. There's not linked to the semantic history of users. there's personalization, but it's hard to link it to exactly the search phrases you've been using, it's a strange quirk of Google. There's a big table of numbers that are mostly irrelevant. Those are just to check out similarity in different indices, just to show which are the most sort of personalized search terms. So you get average so you can see here where trade and immigration are the most volatile in terms of personalization, but it sort of varies. And this table is just here for filler, it seems. Just so it's not all text, it's like a table you can look at. I also looked at autocomplete because not a lot of people have looked at autocomplete, and it's quite interesting because I use autocomplete all the time because I can't be bothered typing out an entire search phrase. But if people are using autocomplete, what role does it play? If you get filtered topical to your interests search suggestions, you might be clicking on them and it might have an impact. So between 30 and 36% of autocomplete suggestions after all the experimental stuff were new, which is quite interesting, except there are only like 4 search suggestions you get, so I don't know how much that really matters. Consistent, again, with the search results, personalization was consistent across accounts, no partisanship observed, but there were some qualitative differences between the types of autocomplete suggestions. So they did become slightly more political topically, which is not surprising. I mean, if you do searches and you're Google and the drop-downs, always, if I'm searching something, it's always about statistics or politics or something, because that's all I seem to search for. So there is evidence of sort of topical personalization in that sense, with your pre-test autocomplete suggestions and post-test autocomplete suggestions, changing to become more political based on the user's search and browsing history. There were results omitted from the paper, if anyone's actually read the paper, about the rank order of personalization, which is quite interesting. Most personalization occurs from ranks 5 to 12, with a weird peak at 6 to 8, but first 1 to 4, 1 to 5 search results don't get a lot of personalization, and what we found in our survey, which will be reported soon, is that people don't really go beyond the first few search results, so if they're not being personalized to that extent, it doesn't matter. Like, most personalization, strangely, occurs between like pages 2 and 13 of Google, but no one goes to page 2 of Google, so I can't remember the last time I went to page 2 of Google. So in terms of types of results and partisanship, sort of source diversity questions, this is also quite interesting. You get the same sources and domains appearing across left and right accounts, so it doesn't really have an impact in that sense. But it raised an interesting question when I was looking at sort of what we got in terms of the privileging of sources and sort of how Google ranks results and sort of creates these little boxes. You'll notice a lot when you search that Wikipedia always appears on the first page of search results. You get very major news outlets. The New York Times appears a lot, The Guardian appears a lot. And strangely, what I found was that a lot of the sources that were appearing at the top of search results, especially in the news sections, were what you might call left-leaning. I don't know if everyone calls the New York Times and The Guardian left-leaning, but a lot of people do. And there was not a lot of, Fox News right-leaning. It was quite interesting in that regard, but this is based on limited data. It would be quite interesting to explore this further, the source diversity in Google search results and whether there is sort of a privileging of sources, because it all really comes down to Google's search algorithm, power law distributions of search results, people clicking on more results, people linking to more of these sites, New York Times, The Guardian, big names, gets linked to a lot. But then the question is, why would Fox News not appear in the same regard? So overall, getting to the relevant parts for discussion, yes, there is personalization, but there is no evidence I can find, at least in this study, of partisan filter bubbles being created. there is the potential always that you could create a filter bubble. You could plug in even more partisan search terms. You could just constantly search for politics all day, break up a search history for a month long of partisan searching, but how much does that really mirror reality? People are diverse in their media use, they're diverse in their searching, which is what we also find in our survey, which hasn't been reported. And that people sort of don't tend to place themselves inside a filter bubble. And if you are inside a filter bubble, you've most likely put yourself there. The issue of topical personalization is quite interesting, which is something that might be worth exploring more. If someone searches a lot for certain things, will Google start giving them just information on that topic? If you're very interested in sports, all your search results become sports, or if you're very interested in politics, it just becomes all politics. My results are based on limited data, but it'd be interesting to explore that further. But the main policy question that arises out of all of this is sort of algorithmic transparency. What should the public know about how Google filters and sort of presents results? And what is their responsibility in telling people? Because a lot of this comes down to trust. You find that when people don't trust a medium, or you don't trust social media, you don't trust a technology, then major questions arise. And you're not going to get a lot of trust if you're just a black box that no one can see into. And that sort of arises also in survey data. The fact that people don't know how Google exactly does all of this filtering and delivery of search results impacts on trust, and that impacts on how people use the medium and sort of what they get out of it. So if there are, at the end of the day, topical filtering or unlimited limits on source diversity, the question is, should users be made more aware of that fact? I had some notes here as well I was writing down.
A few minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say something else, and then I forgot what it was. But yeah, going back to the questions Dominique raised about sort of social versus algorithmic creation of filter bubbles, the more I look into it, the more I research it, the more you find that this type of filter bubble issue is a social issue, if it does exist at all. If anyone finds themselves inside a filter bubble, it's probably something of their own creation. If it's Facebook, or if it's Twitter, or if it's Google search results, anyone who finds themselves in sort of that space has probably put themselves there either willingly or unwillingly, just because they are that much of a partisan individual. But for the most part, regular everyday people, their searching is diverse, their media use is diverse, people see things from the other side, they're exposed to ideas and arguments from the other side, even though they might not want to talk directly to people. As you might find on Twitter, they might not talk to each other, but they'll still see information from the other side. So at the end of the day, my take on the filter bubble hypothesis is that it's very much over-exaggerated, or we shouldn't be as alarmed as we are just trying to be calm at the start of this conference, calm everyone down about the problems we might be facing. Yeah, and that what I've sort of been finding in my other research and what I've been looking into recently is that people do expose themselves to information that's diverse. People do fact check. I'm working on a paper on fact checking at the moment, exploring, the role of partisanship in fact checking, whether it has a role in the way people search for information and sort of access media, and that people do use diverse media. People do expose themselves. People do search for facts to check dubious information on social media. And when I write that paper and publish it, everyone can see it if they really want to.
Okay.
I can't think of what else I was going to say. I felt like I had more to say.
But we do have a question period, so.
Yeah, exactly. People can ask me anything they want. In terms of future research, I think I've already mentioned these. If you want to explore the idea of filter bubbles in Google, the questions are, if you want to train accounts to be left or right-leaning to show a filter bubble, how long should you search for? How much search history do you need? What's realistic? And how partisan is partisan? Are you going to get filter bubbles with just really extremist white supremacists? Is that the kind of person who will end up in a filter bubble? Or are you going to get a filter bubble with your everyday person on the street and the way they search? It's a question of degree. And then there's also the real world, maintaining sort of external validity in any study you do. Because I find that in sort of the anecdotal evidence for filter bubbles is all based on sort of very narrow examples that sort of don't mirror the reality of every day. And future research would be interesting to look into topical filter bubbles and source diversity, but my data is very limited at the moment. But it'd be very interesting to explore, especially that idea of left, right-leaning news outlets in Google search results, and so exploring how Google might be delivering those results to people, and whether there's an issue of how transparent they need to be about that delivery of information to us, especially, I think, also with Facebook as well. That might be an issue. But we can talk about that in discussions.
Excellent, thank you. If you'd like to sit back down. Now, we're ready for the question phase. Question for the keepers of the tech. Should we liven up these microphones? Will that help for the live streaming? And do we want to have the questions on a microphone?
The questions have to be on the.
Okay, great. Terrific. Let me start here at the front, and we'll work our way toward the back. I want to thank both speakers for getting us launched onto a number of interesting topics. I was struck by something that I think you both were driving at, perhaps, and that is one issue is it's a common wisdom now to say, oh, most people live in filter bubbles. Those filter bubbles are imposed on them by technology, and this is terrible. And you seem to be questioning all of those premises, both of you in your different ways.
Pretty much.
So that's always a great thing to have the conventional wisdom shaken up, and maybe we'll pursue some of those questions as we go forward. So let's start here. And would you please introduce yourself and pose a question?
Hi, I'm Azra Stavros. I'm a professor of computer science. Thank you for your presentation. I do agree that people should understand a little bit more about these algorithms. I'm not so sure how much an average person understands brain surgery before they go to a brain surgeon. I trust them. And I think that to explain really how algorithms work is hard. I don't think actually many of the people in this room even would understand that why Google is not, I mean, the tests you have done are great, but I wouldn't have done them because Google wouldn't work if they start personalizing search. Let me explain what I mean here. The reason Google is so powerful is because of how people link to each other. If Google starts playing with that, affecting that, then actually their ability to do searching will go down. So there is something inherent for the algorithms that Google uses to work. They cannot bias them to start with, right? So there's something even deep about these algorithms that need to be understood, and I don't think the average person can understand them. I agree that it is social, but let me pose the following question. How could society deal with this huge amounts of information without filtering it? And is there a way to filter it without introducing bias?
Well, I think the value of sort of doing these explorations is to figure out sort of the unintended consequences of technological design. You can design an algorithm, you can design a piece of technology, put it out to the world, and then not know what kind of effect it has. So it's good to test, to figure out, because people raise these theories about Google's personalization being bad or giving you certain results that are putting you in a bubble. I wanted to test that. because in terms of, I've already forgotten the question. In terms of giving people the sort of the information and the truth that they need, I can't remember where I'm going now. What was the question?
Well, the question is, can you afford not to filter?
Can you afford?
Any filter will be a bias.
Yeah. It all comes down to, I guess, that sort of idea of what is the most important information. You can't, I think, afford not to, because otherwise you end up in a sort of internet soup of you can't find what you need. And I think people do very much value the way Google filters and gives them information. But it would be nice if they could explain more how it works. There's an issue of how much do you explain and how much can you game the algorithm if you understand how it works. That's the issue with Facebook and Facebook marketing. But yeah, I think there's much value in filtering and delivering search results in a sort of semi-personalized way, and people do seem to value that when you survey them. But it's a matter of exploring the unintended possible consequences of that and making sure that you keep an eye on how things are working on Google. Do you have an answer as well?
Yeah, thanks for your question, because it's my survey research topics now, algorithm accountability, and I think you're right to say that we need algorithm. We need them, really. We need to filter, we need to rank, we need to distribute information. That's something which is very important. But in our society, there is a kind of crisis of confidence against algorithms. So that's the reason why we need to educate to how they work. And it doesn't mean that we need to make all the citizens computer scientists and to understand a naive bias in study, support vector machine or machine learning techniques. But we need to understand what kind of principles are inside the procedural operation of calculation that they are doing. And that's the reason why we don't have to ask to the neutrality of algorithm, but to the loyalty of algorithm. They need to say to people what kind of thing they are doing, and we need to audit them just in order to verify and to be sure that they are doing what they are saying us that they are doing. And we need to know if Amazon is recommending us the books that have been read by other people that have bought the same books. Perhaps it's not the case. So the idea that have been raised into the public policy debate by James Grimmelman, the idea that loyalty of algorithm is important, I think it's the way we can regulate and have a kind of public discussion between computer scientists, web platforms, and internauts and citizens about the way they are ranking information. We need to rank information, but we need to know how they, to have more information and more education about how they are doing their job.
Okay. A call for transparency.
Yeah, sure.
Here, please introduce yourself. Yeah.
Joanne Oravec, University of Wisconsin, IT. And I'm interested in Dominique and how he is looking at social media metrics and how important they are. We need to know how popular things are. We seem to have a need to know how popular things are, how many people have downloaded something, how many hits things have, and all that. And I'm wondering, and your research seems to bear that out. I might have missed something, but it seems to bear that out. And I'm just wondering, those statistics can be gained very quickly. Oh. One can buy followers, one can hit certain pages long enough to make some real changes in that popularity. And I'm wondering, are the search engines and more of the Facebook social media platforms, et cetera, are those platforms interested in keeping those statistics real? Or are they, in effect, playing along with those people who would doctor those statistics? Thanks so much.
In fact, my idea, I've wrote a very pedagogical book on this question in French, but my idea is that in the web history, we have 4 different principles of calculation that appear. One is based on popularity, number of clicks. One is based on authority, and it's a Google search engine. One is based on reputation, on personal reputation, and it's social media metrics. And The new families of calculation, which is coming now, is machine learning prediction, and which is based on the idea of personal prediction. And it's 4 different representations of society, because popularity, authority, reputation, and prediction are not the same values, in fact. And for sure, for those 4 different ways to represent society, we can game the system. And for every calculation matrix, we try to game the system. And with the reputation matrix of social media, it's very easy to do that. And the thing which always seems strange to me is that, for example, for Google, which is the authority principle, for Google, it was always very important to try to defeat people who are trying to game the system, because it transforms, it alters the results that are coming. That's the reason why there is this kind of dance between the algorithm and webmaster and algorithm, and it always changes because people are finding new tricks in order to game the system. For Facebook, it's not a problem. For Twitter, it's not a problem. People can buy thousands of false accounts that are coming, robots that are creating a strange of reputation, false reputation. It doesn't matter for them because it don't have an impact on a kind of global matrix that can organize the information for all the internautes. So that's the reason why all those kind of social metrics are not very reliable if we want to make social science, because they give us a new kind of information about the competition, the tactic between different actors in order to gain reputation.
Thank you. Question here.
Hi, Giovanni Ciampaglia, Indiana University. I have a question for Dominique, but perhaps something that both panelists can talk about. It's very interesting you referred to the Facebook study on selective exposure. I'm sure you're well aware of the many methodological issues people have been finding there.
Sure.
But especially perhaps the most interesting part is the kind of self-serving nature of those results. So my question is, how much should we trust the research that's coming from the very same actors that might be creating this situation? In a certain sense, it's as if we were trusting the tobacco industry to tell us that smoking is perfectly fine. And so, yeah, that's...
Yeah. Yes, we must be very cautious about that. I think you're right to say that. But let's say that epidemic, which has done this work, is not someone that we can influence in different ways. She's in web science, in computer science. She's one of the most important academics on the scene. So I'm sure that there is a kind of robustness in those results, even if there are methodological questions about the kind of accounts that they choose, because they have 10 million of accounts. But people declare their own political opinion. On Facebook, there are not a lot of declaration of political opinion. It's just 10% of the person. But one of the things, well, it's more a personal remark about the study, but the idea that comes with this study is the fact that Facebook algorithm, because of machine learning techniques, is now oriented in the idea that it's people click on behavior that transforms the rules of calculation that will show them information in their newsfeed. So there's this idea that the responsibility is on the user. So it's very close to neoliberal society, in which we always project the responsibility toward the user in saying them, in fact, if you're diverse in your click, I will be diverse. The algorithm will be diverse. If you're very monotonous, and if you always choose the same kind of information, you will be in the filter bubble. And so there's this idea that in a certain way, the political ideology of the Facebook algorithm, and the study shows that, is that we let the society decide. We let individuals decide. We don't want to choose for them. We don't want this paternalistic editorial power in which we are going to do that or that. And by this way, people who have a lot of social resource can have a diverse exposition to information. But other people who have the same friend, who are geographically very close to their friends, who have a small range of cultural and political test. We will be in this kind of bubble reproducing social factors more than algorithmic decision.
Dominique, thank you. Friends, it's my responsibility to jump in here at this point. I'm delighted to see that there are so many questions, and I want to know that you're all welcome to stay, to carry on these conversations in this beautiful space that we have here today. At the close of this session, I'd like to welcome back Professor Jim Katz with some concluding remarks. Jim?
Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, panel chair, for your important contributions. Actually, I see that there is a large gap between various pools of expertise, say, for example, between computer science and social science. And it's not always easy. In fact, it's very hard to try and bridge these gaps. And yet, bridging these gaps is what is quite important to let each of these disciplines become informed by the other. As an academic, I'm thinking of how difficult it is if you have a joint hire between, say, the Department of Communication and the Department of Computer Science. How can that person survive the high standards of their respective departments? And on that note, if I may, I'd like to introduce Azar Bestrovos, who you asked a very salient question here in the beginning about brain surgery, which I actually happen to be highly expert at, as well as computer science, social science, arts, literature, and so forth. Once again, for our streaming audience, I'm making a joke. You wouldn't want me to do brain surgery on you. Thank you for the I'm anticipating a sea of emails coming in requesting my services, but I am unavailable. But nonetheless, on a more serious note, I would like to allow and invite Azar Bestrovos to say a few words about what his institute is trying to achieve and why he is here today and why Giovanni Campali is here also. And so if I may, please invite Azar to say a word.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you all and welcome. So the Hariri Institute for Computing, which is across the street, we have been created 5 years ago. It is an institute that looks at connecting computer science and with the rest of the university. Computer science, for its, let's say, first 20, 30 years of existence has been inward looking, just about making that phone as fast and as cheap